Jake Morrison woke up at 5 in the morning like he did every day for the past 3 years. The sun was just starting to peek over the mountains that surrounded New Haven Colony. He could hear the fusion plant humming in the distance, a steady sound that had become like a heartbeat to him. He walked quietly to the kitchen and started making coffee. The smell filled their small house, mixing with the fresh air that came through the open windows. Jake loved these quiet moments before his son Danny woke up. It gave him time to think and plan their day. Danny was 12 years old now, tall for his age, with brown hair that never wanted to stay flat. He had his mother's eyes, bright blue and always curious about everything. Jake smiled, thinking about how excited Danny got when he learned something new. The boy was smart. It's maybe too smart for a frontier colony like New Haven. Jake heard footsteps on the wooden floor and turned to see Danny walking into the kitchen. His hair was sticking up in 3 different directions and he was rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Dad," Danny said with a yawn. "Morning, son. You want some breakfast before school?" Danny nodded and sat down at their small table. Jake made eggs and toast, the same breakfast they had most mornings. It was simple food, but it was enough. On New Haven, people learned to be happy with what they had. The colony had about 2,000 people living in it. Most of them were farmers, who grew food in the rich soil, or miners who dug valuable metals from the mountains. There were also people like Jake, who kept the machines running and made sure everyone had power and clean water. Jake worked at the fusion plant as a maintenance engineer. It was not exciting work, but it was important. Without the plant, the colony would have no electricity, no heat, and no way to power the machines that made life possible on this planet. "Dad, can you help me with my project tonight?" Danny asked, between bites of toast. "What kind of project?" "It's about alien technology. I want to understand how their ships work and why they're so much faster than ours." Jake felt a small knot form in his stomach. He did not like it when Danny asked about aliens or their technology. It reminded him of things he wanted to forget, things from before they came to New Haven. "Sure, I can help," Jake said, trying to keep his voice normal. "But remember what I told you about being careful with that kind of information?" "I know, Dad. Don't talk to strangers about it, especially not alien strangers." Jake nodded. He had taught Danny to be careful around aliens, but he had never told him why. How could he explain to a 12-year-old boy that some aliens saw humans as nothing more than animals? How could he tell Danny about the things he had seen during the war? After breakfast, Jake walked Danny to school. The school was a simple building made of local stone and wood. There were only 40 children in the whole school, from age 5 to 16. Mrs. Carol Thompson taught the younger kids, while Mr. Steve Martinez handled the older ones. "See you tonight, Dad," Danny said as he ran toward the school building. "Good," Jake called after him. Jake watched his son disappear into the building, then walked to the fusion plant. The walk took him through the center of town, past the general store, the medical clinic, and the small office where Lisa Grant worked as the colony administrator. Lisa was a good woman who cared about the people in New Haven. She was one of the few people who knew about Jake's past, about his time in the Earth Defense Force during the war with the Corvani hegemony. She had promised to keep his secret. She had kept that promise for 3 years. At the fusion plant, Jake put on his work clothes and checked the daily reports. The plant was running smoothly like it did most days. He spent the morning checking pipes and circuits, making sure everything was working the way it should. Around lunchtime, sat outside the plant and ate a sandwich while looking at the mountains. New Haven was a beautiful place, peaceful and quiet. It was nothing like the military bases where he used to live, nothing like the battlefields where he used to fight. Jake had been a soldier for 12 years before he came to New Haven. He had fought in the Terran Hegemony War, the big conflict between humans and the Corvani Empire that lasted for 8 years. He had seen things that still gave him nightmares sometimes, but that was all behind him now. He had chosen to leave that life. When his wife Sarah died in a transport accident 3 years ago, Danny needed a father, not a soldier. New Haven needed an engineer, not a warrior. After work, Jake walked home and found Danny already there, working on his homework at the kitchen table. The boy had books and papers spread out everywhere, and he was drawing pictures of different types of spaceships. "How was school?" Jake asked. "Good. We learned about the trade routes that bring supplies to the colony. Did you know that ships from 12 different species come here? I did know that, Jake said, sitting down next to his son. New Haven is an important stop for traders. Have you ever seen a Corvani ship, Dad? Jake felt that knot in his stomach again. A few times, he said carefully. Mr. Martinez says they have the biggest and strongest ships in the galaxy. He says they keep peace between all the different species. Jake wanted to tell his son that the Corvani did not keep peace. They forced it. Their rules through fear and violence. But Danny was too young to understand such things. Just remember to be respectful if you ever meet aliens, Jake said. But also remember to stay close to me if that happens. They spent the evening working on Danny's project together. Jake helped him understand how fusion engines worked and why some ships could travel faster than others. Danny listened carefully and asked good questions. He really was a smart boy at bedtime. Jake tucked Danny into his bed and said goodnight. Then he sat on his front porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Corvani ships were moving through space. Carrying soldiers who thought humans were weak and stupid, Jake hoped those ships would never come to New Haven. He wanted to keep living this quiet life with his son, fixing machines and watching Danny grow up. He wanted to forget about war and fighting and all the terrible things he had done as a soldier. But deep down, in a part of his mind he tried to keep locked. Away, Jake Morrison knew that his peaceful life could not last forever. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and sooner or later, that danger would find them. The alarm at the fusion plant started ringing at 10 in the morning on what should have been a normal Tuesday. Jake was checking pressure readings when the sound cut through the air like a knife. But this was not the plant's alarm. This was the colony-wide emergency signal that had never been used in the 3 years. Jake had lived on New Haven. Jake dropped his tools and ran outside. Other workers were doing the same thing, all looking up at the sky with worried faces. In the distance, Jake could see a dark shape moving through the clouds. It was big, much bigger than the trader ships that usually visited the colony. Is that thing? Asked Tom Baker, one of the younger engineers. Jake felt ice form in his stomach. He knew exactly what it was. The ship was long and black with sharp edges that looked like weapons. Red lights blinked along its sides, and it moved with the deadly grace that Jake remembered from his nightmares. Corvani, warship, Jake said quietly. What did you say? Tom asked. Nothing. We need to get back to town now. Jake started running. Toward the colony center, his mind racing. Corvani warships did not make social visits. They came when the Empire wanted to take something or punish someone. Jake thought about Danny at school and ran faster. The ship was landing in the open field next to the town when Jake arrived. It was even bigger up close. Isley, 3 times the size of the largest building in New Haven. Steam rose from its landing engines, and the ground shook under its weight. People were coming out of their houses and shops, pointing at the ship and talking in nervous voices. Some of the children were excited, thinking this was some kind of show. The adults looked more worried, especially the ones who had lived through the war. Lisa Grant was standing in front of the administration building, talking quickly into her communication device. Jake walked over to her. Any word from Earth Command? He asked. Lisa shook her head. The ship is jamming all long-range communications. We can't call for help. A large door opened on the side of the Corvani ship. A ramp extended to the ground, and soldiers began marching out. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, with gray skin and black armor that covered their bodies. Each one carried a plasma rifle that could burn through steel. Jake counted 12 soldiers and 1 officer. The officer was even taller than the others, with red markings on his armor that showed his high rank. This was a war prime, one of the Corvani Empire's most dangerous leaders. Citizens of New Haven, the war prime said in a voice that carried. Across the entire town, he spoke human language, but with an accent that made every word sound like a threat. I am War Prime Zethic of the Imperial Fleet. You will assemble in the town center immediately for inspection. Inspection for what? Lisa called out. War Prime Zethic turned his attention to her. His face was hard and cold, with yellow eyes that seemed to look right through people. For contraband technology and compliance violations, The Empire has received reports that this colony is harboring illegal materials. Jake knew this was a lie. New Haven was one of the most peaceful colonies in human space. They grew food and mined metals, did not have any illegal technology. But the Corvani did not need real reasons to do what they wanted. "I'm Administrator Lisa Grant," Lisa said, walking toward the alien officer. "If you have concerns about our colony, I'm happy to discuss them with you. There's no need to frighten the civilians." War Prime's ethic looked down at Lisa like she was an insect. "You will be silent, human. Your species does not give orders to the Empire." Jake felt his old instincts stirring. He could see how this was going to end, and it would not be good for anyone in New Haven. He started moving through the crowd, trying to get closer to Danny's school. The Corvani soldiers were spreading out through the town, pointing their weapons at people and shouting orders. They were herding everyone toward the town center like animals. Jake could see the fear in people's faces, especially the children who did not understand what was happening. "Dad!" Jake heard Danny's voice and turned to see his son running toward him. Danny had left the school building with the other children and their teacher, Mrs. Thompson. "Danny, stay close to me," Jake said, grabbing his son's hand. "What do those aliens want, Dad?" "I don't know yet, son. But whatever happens, you stay next to me. Do you understand?" Danny nodded, but Jake could see the fear in his eyes. The boy was smart enough to know that something was very wrong. War Prime's ethic was now standing in the center of town with his soldiers around him. The entire population of New Haven was gathered in front of him, nearly 2,000 people pressed together. In a tight group, "Citizens of New Haven," Zethak began. "The Empire has determined that this colony has become too prosperous for a human settlement. You have forgotten your place in the Galactic Order." Lisa stepped forward again. "We're a peaceful farming colony. We follow all Imperial regulations and pay our taxes. We've done nothing wrong. Your mistake, Administrator Grant, is believing that humans have rights under Imperial law," Zethak said. "You exist only because the Empire allows it. Right. When you become too comfortable, too independent, you must be reminded of your true position." Jake felt his hands starting to shake, but not from fear. It was anger, the same anger he had felt during the war when he watched Corvani soldiers kill innocent people for sport. He squeezed Danny's hand tighter. "To demonstrate this lesson," Zethak continued, "we will select certain individuals for questioning. Those who cooperate will be treated well. Those who resist will serve as examples for the others." War Prime pointed at Lisa. "You will come with us first, Administrator. Your records will be examined for evidence of sedition." "I won't go anywhere with you," Lisa said. "You have no authority here." War Prime Zethak nodded to one of his soldiers. The alien raised his plasma rifle and fired a single shot. The energy blast hit Lisa in the chest, and she fell to the ground without making a sound. She was dead before she hit the dirt. Screams erupted from the crowd. Children were crying, and adults were trying to back away from the soldiers. But there was nowhere to go. The Corvani had them surrounded. "That is what happens to humans who forget their place," Zethak announced. "Now, we will continue with our inspections. Anyone who attempts to leave or interfere will join your former administrator." Jake stared at Lisa's body and felt something cold settling over his mind. This was exactly how it had started during the war. The Corvani would pick a peaceful human settlement and make an example of it to frighten other colonies into submission. Danny was pressing against his side, trembling. With fear, Jake put his arm around his son and tried to think of a way to get them both out of this alive. But he was one man against 12 armed soldiers, and he had his son to protect. War Prime Zethak was walking through the crowd now, looking at people like he was shopping for groceries. His yellow eyes lingered on the children, and Jake felt his stomach turn. He knew what the alien was thinking. The War Prime stopped in front of an elderly man named Pete Williams who ran the general store. Pete was 70 years old and had never hurt anyone in his life. "You look like a leader among these humans," Zethak said to Pete. "Tell me about the illegal technology hidden in this colony." "There isn't any," Pete said in a shaky voice. "Just farmers and miners. We don't have anything you'd want." Zethak smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp for any civilized creature. "I think you are lying to me, old human. The plasma rifle fired again, and Pete Williams fell next to Lisa Grant. 2 good people were dead, and Jake knew there would be more before this was over, unless he did something to stop it. Warprime Zethek walked through the crowd of humans like a predator, choosing his next meal. His yellow eyes moved from person to person, studying their faces. Jake could see the alien was enjoying the fear he was causing, which was not about finding illegal technology. This was about showing humans that the Corvani Empire could do whatever it wanted to them. Danny pressed closer to his father's side. The boy was trying to be brave, but Jake could feel him shaking. All around them, people were crying quietly and holding their children tight. Everyone knew that more people were going to die, but nobody knew who would be next. The problem with humans, Zethek said loudly, is that you breed too much and dream too big. You build colonies like this one and think you can live like equals to the Empire. This is a mistake that must be corrected. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard speeches like this before, during the war. The Corvani always talked about teaching lessons and correcting mistakes. What they really meant was murder and terror. One of the Corvani soldiers was walking near the edge of the crowd when he stopped next to Mrs. Thompson, Danny's teacher. She was standing with 5 young children who were all crying for their parents. This one has been filling young minds with human propaganda, the soldier said to Zethek. Should we question her about what she teaches? Mrs. Thompson was a kind woman who had taught children for 20 years. She loved her students and always made sure they learned to be good people. The thought of these monsters hurting her made Jake's hands clench into fists. Not yet, Zethek replied. First, we will demonstrate what happens to the next generation. When humans become too bold, the Warprime's yellow eyes fixed on the group of children near Mrs. Thompson. Jake felt ice form in his veins as he realized what the alien was planning. You boy, Zethek called out, pointing at Danny. Come here, no, Jake said immediately, stepping in front of his son. Dad, Danny whispered, grabbing onto Jake's shirt. The father wants to protect his offspring, Zethek said with amusement. How touching. But the young one will come forward now, or we will kill 10 other children instead. Jake looked around at the other families in the crowd. He saw parents holding their own children, terror in their eyes. He could not let 10 children die to save Danny, and Zethek knew it. It's okay, Dad, Danny said quietly. I'll be brave. No. Son, stay behind me. But Warprime Zethek nodded to his soldiers, and 3 of them raised their plasma rifles, pointing them at different children in the crowd.
Ow.
The message was clear. Danny would come forward, or other children would die. Jake felt something breaking inside his chest. This was the choice that no father should ever have to make. Save his own child and watch others die, or sacrifice his son to save strangers. I'll go, Danny said, trying to step around his father. Jake grabbed his son's arm. Danny, no.
Dad.
You taught me to protect people who can't protect themselves. Those little kids can't fight back, but maybe I can. Jake stared at his 12-year-old son and saw courage that most adults would never have. Danny was willing to die to save other children. Jake had never been more proud of anyone in his life, and he had never felt more helpless. The boy understands, Zethek said. He knows his place in the natural order. You should be proud, human. Your offspring will serve a greater purpose. Danny walked toward the Warprime with his head held high. Jake wanted to run after him too, fight the soldiers, to do something. But he was surrounded by armed aliens, and any move he made would get Danny killed faster. Tell me, young human, Zethek said when Danny reached him. What do you learn in your schools about the Corvani Empire? We learn that you keep peace in the galaxy, Danny answered, his voice steady despite his fear. And what do you think of that peace now? Danny looked back at his father, then at the bodies of Lisa Grant and Pete Williams lying in the dirt. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. I think real peace comes from people being kind to each other, not from being afraid of getting killed. Several of the Corvani soldiers laughed at this answer. Warprime Zethek smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Your species is truly naive, Zethek said. Peace comes from strength. Strong rule, and the weak obey. Today, you will help me teach. this lesson to your people." Jake felt his chest tightening as he realized what was about to happen. He had seen this before, during the war. The Corvani would pick the most innocent victim they could find and make their death as terrible as possible. It was psychological warfare designed to break the spirit of everyone watching. "Danny," Jake called out, "look at me, son." Danny turned toward his father. The boy's blue eyes were bright with unshed tears, but he was not begging or crying. Was trying to be strong for his dad? "I love you, son," Jake said. "Remember that no matter what happens." "I love you too, Dad," Danny replied. "And I'm not scared." But Jake could see that his son was scared. Danny was just being brave because that was what Jake had taught him to be. The boy was facing death with more courage than most soldiers Jake had known. War Prime Zethic raised his hand, and his soldiers formed a circle around Danny. They were going to make this last a long time to maximize the psychological impact on the watching humans. "Citizens of New Haven," Zethic announced, "watch carefully as we demonstrate the cost of human arrogance. This child dies because your species has forgotten its place in the galaxy." The first plasma blast hit Danny in the leg, burning through his clothes and skin. The boy cried out in pain, but did not fall. The soldiers were using low-power settings. It's designed to cause maximum suffering without killing quickly. Jake tried to move forward.
Yes.
But the Corvani soldiers grabbed his arms and held him back. He struggled against them, but their armor made them too strong. "Dad," Danny called out, his voice breaking with pain. "I'm here, son. I'm right here." The second blast hit Danny in the arm. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and several people in the crowd were getting sick. But War Prime Zethic was not finished. He wanted this to last. Jake felt something snapping in his mind as he watched his son suffer. The peaceful maintenance engineer was disappearing, replaced by something else, something that had been sleeping for 3 years, but was now waking up. The third blast caught Danny in the chest. The boy fell to his knees, but he was still looking at his father. "It's okay, Dad," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Remember what you taught me about being brave." Those were the last words Danny Morrison ever spoke. The fourth plasma blast hit him in the head, and Jake's son was gone. The silence that followed was complete. Even the Corvani soldiers stopped talking. 2,000 people stood frozen, staring at the small body lying in the dirt. Jake stopped struggling against the soldiers holding him. He stopped moving completely. Something had died inside him along with Danny, but something else had been born. The father was gone. But what remained was far more dangerous. War Prime Zethic looked at the crowd of horrified humans and smiled with satisfaction. "Now you understand," he said. "This is what happens when humans think they can live as equals. To their betters, your children pay the price for your arrogance." Jake raised his head and looked directly at War Prime Zethic. When he spoke, his voice was calm and quiet, but somehow more frightening than any scream. "Do you know what a human is capable of when you take away everything he has to lose?" Zethic turned to look at this human who dared to speak after such a demonstration. He saw a man who looked completely broken, completely defeated. Just another weak human who had been taught his place. "Show me primitive," Zethic said with amusement. The War Prime nodded to his soldiers, and they released Jake's arms. Let the broken human father try something foolish. It would be entertaining to watch him die next to his offspring. Jake Morrison took a step toward his son's body, then another step. The crowd watched him in silence, thinking he was going to kneel beside Danny and grieve. They were wrong. When Jake reached Danny's body, he did not kneel. Instead, he bent down and whispered, something that only his dead son could hear. Then he stood up and looked at War Prime Zethic with eyes that no longer held any trace of the peaceful man who had lived on New Haven for 3 years. "My name is Jake Morrison," he said quietly. "I was a Ghost Squad operative in the Terran Defense Force. I killed 347 Corvani soldiers during the war. You just gave me a reason to kill more." War Prime Zethic stared at the human standing over his dead son and felt something he had not experienced in many years. Uncertainty. The broken father who had begged for his child's life was gone. In his place stood something that made Zethic's warrior instincts whisper warnings. "Ghost Squad," Zethic said, his voice losing some of its confidence. That is impossible. Ghost Squad was destroyed during the siege of Proxima. No, Jake said, his voice still quiet, but somehow filling the entire town square. We were disbanded. There's a difference. The other Corvani soldiers were looking at their war prime, waiting for orders. They had heard stories about Ghost Squad during the war, but most of them thought the stories were just human propaganda, elite human soldiers who could kill trained Corvani warriors in single combat. It seemed impossible. Jake took another step toward War Prime's ethic. The movement was slow and careful, like a hunter stalking prey. The crowd of colonists watched in complete silence, not understanding what was happening but sensing that something had changed. You made a mistake, Jake continued. You could have killed me first. You could have killed everyone in this town. But you chose to torture my son in front of me. You chose to make me watch while you burned him alive. Zethok raised his plasma rifle, pointing it at Jake's chest. You are one human against 12 trained soldiers. Your reputation means nothing here. My reputation? Jake smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than any scream. You think this is about reputation? Jake's hand moved faster than anyone thought possible. He grabbed the barrel of Zethek's plasma rifle and twisted it sideways before the War Prime could fire. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air, and Jake used the momentum to pull Zethek off balance. The War Prime was 7 feet tall and weighed twice as much as Jake. But Jake had trained for 15 years to fight opponents. Exactly like this. He knew where Corvani joints were weakest, where their armor had gaps, and how their balance could be disrupted. Jake's elbow struck Zethek in the throat, hitting a nerve cluster that temporarily paralyzed the alien's vocal cords. As Zethek staggered backward, Jake spun around and grabbed the plasma rifle from the nearest soldier. The soldier was reaching for his weapon when Jake's boot connected with his knee. The joint bent in a direction it was not designed to go, and the soldier collapsed with a scream. Jake caught the falling plasma rifle and fired it in one smooth motion. The energy blast hit the second soldier's center mass, burning through his armor like it was made of paper. The alien fell backward, dead before he hit the ground. The remaining soldiers were finally reacting, raising their weapons and shouting orders to each other. But Jake was already moving, using the crowd of colonists as cover while he changed position. He's just one human, one of the soldiers yelled. Surround him! Appeared behind the soldier who had spoken and grabbed him around the neck. The alien was stronger than Jake, but Jake knew exactly how much pressure to apply and where to apply it. The soldier's neck snapped with a sound like breaking wood. War Prime. Zethek had recovered from the throat strike and was shouting orders. To his remaining troops, kill them all. Every human in this colony. But his soldiers were having trouble finding their target. Jake moved through the crowd like a ghost, appearing long enough to kill another soldier, then disappearing again. The colonists were running in all directions, making it impossible for the Corvani to get clear shots. Jake rolled under a plasma blast and came up next to the fusion plant's control panel. He smashed the safety glass with his elbow and pulled the emergency shutdown lever. The plant's fusion reactor went into emergency mode, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse that disrupted all the Corvani equipment. The aliens' armor systems failed. Their weapons stopped working, and their communication devices went dead. Suddenly, they were just large, strong creatures with no technological advantages. Impossible, Zethak whispered, staring at his dead weapon. Jake stepped out of the crowd, holding a piece of metal pipe he had pulled from the fusion plant. It was not much of a weapon, but in his hands, it became deadly. You wanted to know what humans are capable of, Jake said, walking toward the remaining soldiers. Let me show you. The first soldier charged at Jake with his bare hands, thinking he could overpower the smaller human. Jake sidestepped the attack and swung the metal pipe in a precise arc. It struck the soldier's skull just behind the ear, where the bone was thinnest. The alien dropped like a stone. 2 more soldiers attacked together, trying to pin Jake between them. Jake dropped to the ground and swept his leg in a wide circle, knocking both aliens off their feet. Before they could get up, he drove the metal pipe through the first one's chest and grabbed the second one's head in his hands. The colonists who were still watching saw Jake twist the soldier's head completely around. The sound of breaking vertebrae echoed across the town square. War Prime Zethek was backing toward his ship, his yellow eyes wide with something that might have been fear. This is not possible. Humans are weak. Humans are prey animals. Right about one thing, Jake said, stepping over the bodies of dead soldiers. Most humans are peaceful. We don't like violence. We prefer to build things instead of destroying them. Jake picked up a plasma rifle from one of the dead soldiers. The weapon had been damaged by the electromagnetic pulse, but Jake's military training had taught him how to repair Corvani equipment, quickly bypassed the damaged circuits and brought the weapon back online. But when you hurt our children, Jake continued, when you kill the people we love, we become something else. We become the monsters that your species should fear. Zethek reached the ramp of his ship and started climbing toward the entrance. You cannot follow me onto an Imperial vessel. That would be an act of war. Jake shot him in the leg with the plasma rifle. Zethek screamed and fell down the ramp, his armor smoking where the energy beam had burned through it. War? Jake said, walking up the ramp after the wounded alien. You declared war when you killed my son. This is just me accepting your declaration. The inside of the Corvani ship was dark and filled with the smell of burning electronics. The electromagnetic pulse had damaged most of the ship's systems, but Jake could see that the main computer was still working. He would need that computer. Later, War Prime Zethek was crawling toward the ship's weapon locker, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Jake caught up with him and kicked him in the ribs, rolling him over onto his back. Please, Zethek gasped. I was following orders. The Empire commanded this action. I know, Jake said, kneeling beside the wounded alien. That's why this won't end with just you. Jake spent the next hour extracting information from War Prime Zethek. He learned about other planned attacks on human colonies. He learned about the Empire's secret policy of making examples of successful human settlements. He learned the communication codes that would let him send a message to the Corvani High Command. When he was finished questioning Zethek, Jake walked to the ship's communication console and began composing a message. The War Prime watched from the floor, too weak from blood loss to move. What are you doing? Zethek asked. Sending your bosses a message, Jake replied, typing on the alien keyboard. I want them to know who killed their soldiers and why. The message was simple and direct. You killed my son, killed your soldiers. If you come for any other human colony, I will kill you too. All of you. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Jake Morrison, Go Squad. Jake attached the ship's tactical database to the message, including detailed information about Corvani military capabilities and planned operations. Then he sent it to every command center in the Corvani Empire. When the message was transmitted, Jake turned back to War Prime Zethek. The alien was still alive, but barely. You wanted to teach humans a lesson about their place in the galaxy, Jake said. Let me teach you something about ours. Jake picked up a piece of metal debris from the damaged ship and looked at it thoughtfully. My son was 12 years old. He liked to study alien technology and ask questions about how things worked. Was going to be an engineer like his father? Maybe a scientist? He was going to help build things that made people's lives better. Jake knelt beside Zethek and placed the metal against the alien's throat. You took that away from him? You took away his future, his dreams, everything he could have been? So now I'm going to take something away from you. What? Zethek whispered. Jake smiled the same terrible smile from before. Your certainty that humans are weak. The metal debris was sharp enough to cut through Corvani's skin, but not sharp enough to kill quickly. Jake made sure that War Prime Zethek had plenty of time to think about what he had done before he died. When it was over, Jake walked outside the ship and found the colonists gathered around Danny's body. Mrs. Thompson had covered the boy with her jacket, and several people were kneeling beside him, crying softly. Jake knelt beside his son and gently picked up the small body. Danny seemed so light, so fragile. It was hard to believe that someone so small could have been so brave. Kept my promise, son, Jake whispered. They'll never hurt another child like they hurt you. Jake Morrison stood beside the small grave he had dug behind his house. The other colonists had offered to help with the burial, but Jake wanted to do this alone. Danny deserved his father's full attention for these final moments together. He had wrapped his son in Danny's favorite blanket, the one with pictures of spaceships that the boy had loved since he was little. It seemed wrong that someone so young should be in the ground, but Jake had learned during the war that the universe did not care about what seemed right or wrong. "I have to go away for a while, son," Jake said quietly. "There are more of them out there, and they're planning to hurt other children like they hurt you. I can't let that happen." Jake had spent the last 3 days studying the information he had taken from the Corvani ship.
Antibody!
Warprime's ethics database contained details about dozens of planned attacks on human colonies. The Empire was systematically targeting any human settlement that showed signs of prosperity or independence. The pattern was always the same. Corvani patrol would arrive claiming to conduct inspections. They would execute the local leaders, torture some civilians to create fear, and then leave the survivors to spread word of what happened. It was psychological warfare designed to keep humans afraid and obedient. But now the Empire had a problem. Jake's message had reached every Corvani command center in the galaxy, along with detailed intelligence about their military operations. The humans on Earth would know about the planned attacks within days, and the Empire's surprise advantage would be gone. More importantly, the Corvani High Command now knew that humans had soldiers capable of killing an entire Corvani patrol single-handedly. They would want to capture or kill Jake before he could cause more damage to their operations. Jake finished filling in Danny's grave and placed a simple wooden marker at the head. He had carved his son's name into the wood, along with the words, "He was brave." It was not much of a memorial, but it would have to do for now. Mrs. Thompson approached from the direction of town. Walking carefully like she was afraid of disturbing Jake's mourning, she had been taking care of the other children since the attack, making sure they had food and comfort while their parents tried to process what had happened. "Jake," she said softly, "we need to talk." Jake looked up from the grave. "What is it, Carol?" "The communication array is working again. We've been receiving messages from Earth Defense Force. They want to send ships to evacuate the colony." Jake shook his head. "Tell them not to come. Corvani will be watching for Earth ships. Any rescue attempt will just get more people killed." "Then what are we supposed to do?" "We can't defend ourselves against another attack." "You won't have to," Jake said, picking up a military pack he had prepared. "They're not coming back for the colony. They're coming for me." Jake had spent the last 3 days preparing for war. He had taken weapons and equipment from the dead Corvani soldiers, including their armor and communication devices. The Corvani ship's computer had also provided him with detailed maps of Empire patrol routes and base locations. "Where are you going?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "Hunting," Jake replied simply. Jake's plan was straightforward. The Corvani Empire had sent a message by killing Danny and the others. Now Jake would send a message back. He would hunt down every Corvani patrol in human space and kill them all. Jake had repaired the damaged ship and programmed it to take him to the Kepler system, where intelligence reports showed another inspection was planned for the mining colony of Haven Ridge. Jake spent the 3-day journey studying Corvani tactics and equipment. He learned how their ships worked, how their weapons functioned, and most importantly, how their minds worked. The Corvani were proud warriors who believed in their own superiority, that pride would be their weakness. When Jake arrived at the Kepler system, he found the Corvani patrol ship Bloodfang in orbit around Haven Ridge. The ship was identical to the one that had attacked New Haven. With the same complement of 12 soldiers and 1 Warprime, Jake used the stolen shuttle's communication system to send a message to the Corvani ship. He identified himself using Warprime's ethics personal codes, claiming to need assistance with a damaged engine. The Bloodfang allowed Jake's shuttle to dock with their ship. The airlock opened, and Jake stepped aboard wearing Corvani armor. He had taken from one of the dead soldiers. Armor had been damaged in the fight, but Jake had repaired it well enough to fool a casual inspection. "We did not expect you to arrive so soon." "Plans have changed," Jake replied, speaking in the Corvani language he had learned during the war. "There has been a security breach. We have new orders." Jake's disguise worked long enough for him to get close to the ship's weapon systems. When he was in position, he removed the plasma charges he had hidden in his armor and placed them at strategic points around the ship's power core. The explosions disabled the ship's main systems and killed 3 soldiers instantly in the chaos that followed. Jake discarded the damaged armor and began hunting the survivors through the darkened corridors of the ship. The Corvani had trained to fight humans in open battle, where their size and strength gave them advantages. But Jake had trained to fight in the close quarters of damaged ships, where speed and knowledge of the enemy's weaknesses mattered more than raw power. Jake used the ship's own systems against the soldiers. He vented atmosphere from sections where they were hiding, forcing them to move to areas where he could ambush them. He used the ship's gravity controls to disorient them, making them stumble into his traps. One by one, the Corvani soldiers died. Jake killed them with their own weapons, with pieces of the ship's machinery, and sometimes with his bare hands. Each death was dedicated to Danny's memory. The war prime of the Bloodfang was named Corvex, and he proved to be more cunning than Zethik had been. When he realized that his ship was being hunted by a single human, he'd sealed himself in the command center and tried to send a distress signal to other Corvani ships. But Jake had anticipated this. He had sabotaged the communication array before. Beginning his attack, Corvex was trapped with no way to call for help. Jake cut through the command center door using a plasma torch from the ship's maintenance bay. When he entered, he found Corvex waiting with a sword in his hands. The alien had decided to die fighting rather than be hunted like an animal. "You are the human who killed Zethak," Corvex said. "I am," Jake replied, drawing his own weapon. "Do you do this? Your species is weak. You should accept your place and live in peace." Jake thought about Danny, about the way his son had tried to be brave even while he was dying. "Peace," Jake said. "You don't know what that word means." The fight was brief, but violent. Corvex was skilled with his sword and had the advantage of reach. But Jake had spent 15 years learning how to kill aliens exactly like him. When it was over, Jake stood alone in the command center of a dead ship. Jake used the ship's computer to access the Corvani military network. He downloaded information about other patrol schedules and planned attacks, then uploaded a new message to the Empire's communication system. This message was different from the first one. Instead of words, it was a video recording showing the bodies of Corvex and his soldiers. At the end of the recording, Jake looked directly into the camera and spoke. "This is what happens to Corvani soldiers who threaten human children. Your attacks on our colonies, or I will kill every one of you I can find. The choice is yours." Jake set the ship's reactor to overload and escaped in his shuttle just before the Bloodfang exploded. The destruction would be visible from Haven Ridge. The colonists would know they were safe. But Jake was just getting started. The Corvani database showed 17 more patrols operating in human space. Each one was planning to attack a human colony. Each one would have to be stopped. Jake set course for the next target and began planning his next attack. Warprime Vorthok and his soldiers on the patrol ship Ironclaw had no idea that death was coming for them. Traveling in a stolen shuttle, piloted by a human who had nothing left to lose, the hunt had begun. And Jake Morrison would not stop until every Corvani soldier in human space was dead or gone. His son's memory demanded nothing less than complete victory. In the depths of space, the stolen shuttle moved like a shadow between the stars, carrying vengeance toward its next target. Jake sat in the pilot's seat, studying intelligence reports and planning his next kill. He was no longer the peaceful maintenance engineer who had lived on New Haven. He was no longer even the soldier he had been during the war. He had become something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. He had become the nightmare that would haunt the Corvani Empire until they learned to leave human children alone. 3 months after Danny's death, Jake Morrison had killed 143 Corvani soldiers across 12 different systems. The Empire's attacks on human colonies had stopped completely, not because they wanted to stop, but because they no longer had enough soldiers willing to patrol human space. Jake sat in the command center of his latest captured ship, the former Corvani destroyer Deathstrike. Reading intelligence reports from across the galaxy, the Empire was calling him the ghost in their military communications, Some Corvani soldiers had started requesting transfers to sectors far away from human colonies, but Jake was not satisfied with just defending human space. The database from the first ship had shown him something that made his blood run cold. The attack on New Haven was part of a larger plan called Operation Silence. The Empire intended to destroy or enslave every human colony in the galaxy. Jake had found the location of the Operations Command Center. It was a massive space station called Doomsgate, hidden in the Vega Nebula. Fleet Admiral Korath, the highest-ranking Corvani military leader, was personally overseeing the plan from that station. Jake had been hunting individual patrols for months, but he knew that would not be enough. As long as Korath was alive, the Empire would keep sending soldiers to kill human families. The only way to truly protect human children was to cut off the head of the monster. The stolen destroyer was heavily armed, but it was still just one ship against a fortified space station defended by an entire fleet. Jake would need to be smarter than he had ever been before. He would probably die in the attempt. Jake thought about Danny as he plotted his course toward the Vega Nebula. His son would have been 13 years old now, probably asking even more questions about alien technology and dreaming about becoming a scientist. Jake wondered what Danny would think about what his father had become. The journey to Doomsgate took 5 days. Jake spent the time studying the station's defenses and planning his attack. The space station was enormous, larger than most cities, with weapon platforms that could destroy any ship that came too close. But Jake had advantages that the Corvani did not expect. He was flying one of their own ships, using their own communication codes, and he knew their military procedures better than most of their own soldiers did. When Jake's ship approached the outer sensor grid, he transmitted the identification codes. For Warprime Zethic's mission, according to the codes, Jake was returning from a successful operation with important prisoners for interrogation. The deception worked. Doomsgate granted him permission to dock, and Jake guided his ship into the station's main landing bay. Hundreds of Corvani soldiers and workers moved around the massive space, loading supplies and maintaining equipment. Jake had filled his ship's cargo hold with explosive charges taken from destroyed Corvani vessels. When he triggered the detonation, the explosion would be large enough to cripple the entire station. But first, he had to find Fleet Admiral Korath. Jake made his way through the station wearing the armor of a dead war prime. The disguise allowed him to move freely through the corridors while he searched for the command center. Along the way, he planted smaller charges at critical points in the station's infrastructure. The command center was located at the heart of Doomsgate, protected by multiple layers of security and heavily armed guards. Jake could see Fleet Admiral Korath through the reinforced windows, studying tactical displays that showed planned attacks on dozens of human worlds. Korath was ancient by Corvani standards. Nearly 9 feet tall with scars covering his gray skin. He had commanded the Empire's forces for over 50 years and had personally ordered the destruction of hundreds of alien civilizations. To him, humans were just another species to be conquered or eliminated. Jake waited until the guard rotation changed, then used the access codes he had stolen to enter the command center. By the time the Corvani inside realized what was happening, Jake had already locked the doors and disabled their communication systems. "Fleet Admiral Korath," Jake said, removing his helmet so the alien could see his face. Korath turned around slowly, his yellow eyes showing no fear, despite being trapped with the human who had been killing his soldiers for months. "So, you are the ghost," Korath said in perfect human language. "You are smaller than I expected." "Size doesn't matter when you're fighting for the right reasons," Jake replied. "And what reasons are those? Revenge for your dead offspring?" Jake felt the familiar anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Not just revenge, justice. You ordered the murder of innocent children to frighten their parents. That ends today." Korath laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Ah! You think killing me will change anything? The Empire has existed for 10,000 years. We have conquered 1,000 species. Humans are nothing special." "Maybe not," Jake said.
"But
we're special enough to send you to whatever hell your people believe in." Jake pulled out a datapad and showed Korath the information he had gathered during his months of hunting. I've documented every one of your planned attacks, every target, every war crime you were planning to commit. This information is already on its way to Earth Defense Force Command." Korath's expression changed as he realized what this meant. The Empire's surprise attacks would fail because Earth would be prepared. Human colonies would be evacuated or defended. The entire operation was ruined. "But more than that," Jake continued, "I've uploaded all of this information to the Galactic Information Network. Every species in the galaxy will know what the Corvani Empire really is. They'll know about the children you've murdered and the families you've destroyed." For the first time, Jake saw something that might have been fear in Korath's eyes. The Empire's power depended on other species being afraid of them. If the galaxy learned about their systematic murder of children, that fear might turn into hatred. "You have destroyed everything," Korath whispered. "Good," Jake said simply. The fleet admiral reached for his weapon, but Jake was faster. The plasma blast caught Korath in the chest, burning through his armor and into his heart. The most powerful military leader in the Corvani Empire fell too. The floor killed by a human maintenance engineer who just wanted to protect children. Jake looked around the command center, at the tactical displays showing planned attacks that would never happen. Dozens of human colonies would be safe because of what he had done. Thousands of children would grow up without fear because their parents no longer had to worry about Corvani raids. Jake activated the charges he had planted throughout the station. He had 30 seconds to reach his ship before the explosions began. As he ran through the corridors, he could hear alarms starting to sound and Corvani voices shouting in panic. Jake reached his ship. Just as the first explosions rocked the station, he launched immediately, flying away from Doom's Gate as secondary explosions tore through its structure. The massive space station that had been the heart of the Empire's war machine began breaking apart. As Jake's ship cleared the blast radius, he received a communication on Earth Defense Force frequencies. The voice belonged to Admiral Kate Sullivan, his former commanding officer. "Ghost Leader, this is Admiral Sullivan. We've received your intelligence package. How did you get access?" "To Fleet Admiral Korath's personal files." "I asked him nicely," Jake replied, watching Doom's Gate collapse into burning wreckage. "Jake, we need you to come home. Earth Defense Force is reactivating the Ghost Squad program. We need experienced operators to train the new recruits." Jake thought about this offer as he set course for human space. He could return to military service, help train other soldiers to protect human colonies. It would be a way to honor Danny's memory while serving a larger purpose. "I'll consider it," Jake said. "But first, I have a promise to keep." Jake changed course toward New Haven. It was time to visit Danny's grave and tell his son that the mission was complete. The Corvani Empire would think twice before threatening human children again. When Jake arrived at New Haven, he found that the colony had grown. New families had moved in, including many with young children. The colonists had built a memorial garden where Lisa Grant and Pete Williams were buried. With Danny's grave at the center, Jake knelt beside his son's marker and placed a small metal object on the grave. It was Fleet Admiral Korath's command insignia, taken from the alien's body before Jake left the destroyed station. "It's finished, son," Jake said quietly. "They won't hurt any more children like they hurt you. I made sure of that." Jake stood up and looked around the thriving colony. Children were playing in the streets, laughing and running without fear. Their parents watched them with smiles instead of worry. This was what Jake had been fighting for. Mrs. Thompson approached from the school building, leading a group of students. On their way to the memorial garden, she stopped when she saw Jake and smiled. "Welcome home," she said. Jake looked at the children gathering around Danny's grave to place flowers they had picked. These children would grow up safe because of what Jake had done. They would become scientists and engineers and teachers. Building a better future for humanity. Danny would have liked that, Jake thought. His son had always believed that people should help each other and protect those who could not protect themselves. In his own way, Jake had followed that lesson.